Welcome to the Possibility Hub video series. I'm Carol Talbot, the creator and founder of the Possibility Hub, an advocate for awakening, encouragement, and creating opportunities for an expansion of awareness and consciousness. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Matthew Ryan, the developer of an energetic healing modality called gamma wave healing, and we're talking about the current solar activity and the recent enormous solar flares. Well, hello once again, Matthew. I'm glad we're back together online. I wanted to ask you first to explain your background in terms of the different types of intel and intelligence that you're connected to on planet and off planet as well.
Well, thanks for having me back, Carol. It's really it's great to see you again, and I'm really happy to be able to come in and share and have these discussions with you. So thanks for inviting me back. As far as background on information, just in a general sense, I think that I've always been kind of a seeker for information that maybe lies outside of the consensus reality, that lies outside of the mainstream accepted definition of how we should translate our history, how we should translate our reality. So I'm kind of already prepped and seeking and reading alternative sources for many years, decades along those lines. But I guess when you're speaking about the intel, it's kind of two specific sources, being both my off-world sources, which we'll get into, and then this on-world source. So just to kind of explain that a little bit, that there is a friend of mine that I've known now for, I think, about 16 years or something like that, 17 years, that he was special forces in the United States military in a specialized group, and, served in some conflicts, and was a very high level soldier in that way. And I met him after his service was already over, and we became friends and shared interests. And over time, though, going back now a few years, we began discussing a lot of these kind of alternative views or translations of what really is happening, more, focused more on the esoteric, more on the metaphysical, the energetic. And it was during, that period of time a few years ago where he was approached by former, team members that he had served with, and he was asked to come back into a type of active duty service, but working within military intelligence. And so he's been working in a military intelligence operation behind the scenes for several years. During that period of time, over these last several years, then there was more of a kind of formalized communication that came from him to myself and a few other friends, and which we could say would be like a type of military intelligence operation to distribute information. So over these last several years, a lot of what we have been seeing unfold, in front of us in our world, I'd received information from him ahead of time, they're telling us that these things are happening, as far as the dismantling of the global control structure that has plagued our world for thousands of years. And so, with that, then there were just reams and reams and reams of information, of communication. That being said, my communication with him was ended. They basically, his group basically said, okay, we're going to stop this communication now until after the event has come to a completion, and then contact will be made again. So at that point,
an event, that is an event.
Yeah, and I guess more accurately, I would say that I probably should describe it as a series of events, an interconnected series of events. But a lot of people commonly refer to this situation as the event that is going to be kind of a trigger moment where we get to see visually the exposure of, and then the dismantling of this control structure that has hidden in the shadows. And and this is something that it's referred to commonly like as the deep state or the cabal or the Illuminati, or we see it in movies like, Spectre in the James Bond films and Hydra in the Marvel movies, so those are all ways of kind of speaking about this network that is in the shadows, that is behind the scenes, that has its control through every aspect of our society, banking, financial, government, everything.
Media.
And so, yeah, media for sure. And that's actually one of the primary tools of enslavement.
Yes.
is the way the media is used.
Kind of want to get an idea of what's coming up, then, watch what they're putting out in the movies, or as somebody said to me, watch The Simpsons.
Yeah, The Simpsons is a funny one because it's hard to know whether or not people are drawing connection on their own or if it was truly looking ahead. But there are a lot of instances that seem way beyond coincidence of what was revealed in The Simpsons. The Marvel movies as well. I've been told very specifically that the Marvel movies are ways to distribute information to the general public, to prepare them for what's coming. And like specifically the movie Black Panther, all of the technology, like we were told that Black Panther is essentially a documentary that is laying out the type of technology that is available to us that has been withheld and is going to be released. So, yeah, the media there, we do have some good aspects for sure within media, but yeah, what a mess. And so anyhow, that would be the one source of kind of boots on the ground information, and when we can speak about some of those specifics of like information as it pertains to now, and then changing gears, then there's also the research that I do and the information that I'm tracking about other people that are doing research in the world, and then there's my own kind of source of information that is a result of my relationship with either my guides, who are either non-physical, spiritual guides, or actual embodied, what we would call I call star beings, high beings that are from other dimensional or civilizations that perhaps are existing in their baseline frequency at a higher frequency than our current civilization is. And so communication with these beings will produce information for me. As well, as we'd spoken about maybe on the earlier podcast, the energetic healing modality that I've developed comes with this inherent connection that enables me to receive information directly, out of the source field, whatever you want to label that. But there's direct information that will come in that has been corroborated hundreds or thousands of times for me. So the validity of that pathway for information also is a contributing factor to just kind of the overall picture of what I understand is happening now and where we have a role within all of this.
Which brings us round to today's session, because you recently received information about the solar emissions, the solar flares that are coming, that yes, I thought would be really pertinent to share, and also to share its impact on people, because I know I see messages all the time of people saying, I'm so tired, or there seems to be kind of like an energy pounding, or that they're finding that they have very vivid dreams or seem to get insights, and they're not sure why this is happening. They're feeling out of sorts. And I think maybe what you can share with us will throw some light on that.
Yes, absolutely. The solar activity has been, maybe I wouldn't say it's as strong as a passion of mine, but it's definitely been a very strong interest. I've probably for about 15 years, I've been very specifically guided to pay attention to the activity on the sun and how that activity translates to affecting the earth. And I'm speaking about physical levels, but mostly speaking about, spiritual, energetic, mental and emotional levels. And so what you're referring to is that there was an intense solar activity or event that happened about 2 weeks ago, I think. And then this sharing that I had done that you were referencing was at some point last week. So basically what happens when we look at the sun, and this is, again, everything that I'll speak about will be within the context of our current framework of understanding of these models of how the celestial mechanics actually functions, which could be wrong, but this is, I'll speak through that lens.
And I think it's very much a time to focus on intuitively if you feel something sits well with you at the moment, not just using your senses of seeing, hearing, feeling, but really intuition, that sense of knowing. Yes.
Absolutely, yes. So let's say roughly 2 weeks ago, the sun. So as the sun rotates, and it takes, I believe, it's maybe 20 something days. I don't remember exactly what the duration is. It might be 28 days would be convenient to be like in the lunar cycle also. But so the sun is rotating, and as the sun is rotating, we are rotating, around the sun. Again, this is according to the currently defined model. And what happens is that when the sun has these changes in magnetic fields on the surface of the sun, which we call sunspots. So there will be changes in these fields, and you actually get changes in temperature and you different things like that as well. But as these sunspots interact with each other, they polarize with like a positive and negative magnetic field. And when the conditions become correct, this magnetic field will result in a release of an enormous amount of energy that will burst out into the solar system, which we call a solar flare. Sometimes associated with those solar flares are these situations that are called coronal mass ejections.
Yeah.
So the corona is like the atmosphere of the sun, and a massive plasma will be emitted out into the solar system like a burst or a cloud. And it travels and spreads and travels and spreads. And again, the scale of this is incomprehensible. I mean, we're talking about like trillions of tons of material that is being released out into the solar system, along with all of the energy that is released in a whole spectrum of frequency out of the solar flares. Why this is important to us is because as this solar activity occurs, there are many direct connections to the Earth and to us individually, because as above, so below, right? That the sun's magnetic fields are reflected in the Earth's magnetic fields are reflected in our field, in our auric field. And so what happened a couple of weeks ago is that the satellites that are looking at the sun, they're focused on the Earth-facing side of the sun. So the satellite is kind of locked in orbit, following it the same trajectory as the Earth would follow, so that we always have a look at the sun and what's facing us, what's going to become geo-effective. As it's released, it will affect the Earth. So what happened a couple of weeks ago is that there was two sunspot complexes on the opposite side of the sun, so they were not facing us. And therefore, our satellites that measure the X-ray emission or the energetic emission of the solar flare, we weren't able to measure the actual release of energy on a scale of like a C, M, or X class solar flare, but we can observe the effect of the coronal mass ejection that occurred from these two sunspots releasing really large solar flares. Based on what we saw from the coronal mass ejection, which went the opposite way out, away from us, if those had been facing the Earth, it could have been a very, very challenging situation, because what ends up happening is as these coronal mass ejections interact with the Earth's magnetic field, and the Earth's magnetic field is very destabilized right now. And so when the coronal mass ejection hits the Earth, it sends in energy through the poles, through the North Pole and the South Pole, which we visually see as aurora. When the aurora borealis, occurs in the Northern Hemisphere, that's an interaction from solar activity. And so with a weakening magnetic field and the scale of this kind of CME that hit us, if it had, or that it didn't hit us, if it had hit us, it could have potentially knocked out all of our telecommunications, the electrical grid. It could have put us into the Stone Age instantaneously with the amount of energy that would have fried all electronics. So this could have been a very devastating situation that we are officially not prepared for. Well, that luckily for us in this moment, that activity went in a different direction. But so for the last like 10 days or so, those two sunspots have rotated around to the point where they're now facing the Earth. And they haven't sent off anything even remotely close to that intensity, but there have been multiple very small flares, multiple small coronal mass ejections, nothing that would affect us at the level of like knocking out the grid, but it does have a huge effect upon us. And this is where the like energetics and the emotions and things like this come into play. So just as kind of anecdotal, the day that those, I guess it was on a Thursday and Friday, so 2 weeks ago. And as that activity happened, I was unaware that the activity had happened during that day, but all day on Thursday and Friday, I felt this energy just grinding and grinding and grinding on my solar plexus. And I was just like, what is going on? And all of these emotions were being brought forward, and all of these intensities were coming up in my field from unprocessed old emotions. I had a relationship that ended a few months ago, and it was like things were coming up, to be seen around all of, things in my life. And then I happened to catch the information that these solar flares had happened and that they were like X-class solar flares. They were very, very big events. And immediately it's like, okay, there we go. Now I can like kind of, wipe that off the brow and understand like what was happening was directly linked into the solar activity. Nearly everybody that I spoke to during those 2 periods of time, they were feeling the same thing. They were feeling this intense energy on their solar plexus, feeling this like almost like a sense of dread, and that's not to say that solar events produce dread. We don't need to be afraid of them. But what ends up happening is, as it interacts with our energetic field, it's going to, if people, let's say, are kind of destabilized, which a lot of people are destabilized right now because of global events, then that interaction, it's like a huge upload of energy that comes in. And if our field is destabilized, all sorts of things can happen and they can express themselves. And this is actually like science research that has been done over the years, measuring the effect of geomagnetic field interaction with a human field. They found that if people are in a negative state, if you're in a negative thought state, and this type of energy is applied to our energy field, that it deepens that negative state. It'll actually take you down.
Right.
Right.
It's going to make it worse.
Totally. But the flip side is also, they found, is also available, that people that had like mindfulness practices, meditation practices, yoga, things like that, a spiritual path, those people in the study group, when they received this geomagnetic field application, everything expanded for them. Right. So this is where I think it's very important for us, and why I really like tracking the solar activity, is because as these events occur, in seeing the big macro scale event of just what's going on in the sun, not even the galactic energy that's here, but observing that and then recognizing, okay, where I'm at within myself is going to be amplified. And so, really being focused on raising our frequency right now, making sure that our, as relationships and connections and behaviors and things like this that are coming up for us to look at, that we're really diving forward into a more harmonized way of being, so that as all of this increasing solar activity, resulting in ultimately what I believe is going to be the great solar flash, that as this energy is continuing to integrate with us, that we can actually expand our experience, and that we're not taken down into these kind of shadow realms, victim to, something that happened in our past.
And of course, when things do come up, as you were saying, you felt it in your solar plexus, you felt things come up about a relationship that finished a couple of months ago. So you can also utilize these to almost like bring oil to the surface of water, to use it and say, okay, what else needs clearing? What else needs clearing? Because it really is a time to, release the ancestral line, clear the clutter, clear the trauma, and start focusing on an expansion of consciousness.
Yes.
People are talking a lot more about contact, and so many more people's psychic abilities are awakening. And I imagine this is also where they can utilize that energy that's coming through,
Yes.
to really expand and make that transition to a higher level of being, to really be your best, and to accrete more of who you truly are.
Absolutely. I think that this is all tied in together around what's happening. And we see it, we see it within our own lives. We see these energies expressing through the world in different ways. We see it in our local system with the sun and the energy, the impact of the sun's energy with our planet. And then we also see it in this broadened sense with these galactic energies, where there is this situation that the scientists, they call the galactic current sheet, which is it's like a ripple. If we can imagine at the great central sun in the center of the Milky Way, it's a supermassive black hole, is what the models say.
Yes.
But this to me is the prime creator source energy expression in our galaxy, which is then quantumly entangled with every single star in our galaxy. And so if you can imagine, like at the great central sun, dropping a rock into a still body of water, and then it creates these ripples that ripple out, right? This is always occurring. The great central sun is emanating a plasma field that moves like ripples through the galaxy. And we are on a cycle where approximately every 12,000 years, one of those ripple waves will move through our physical location in the galaxy. And when that occurs, every single star in the neighborhood is lit up with all of this extra energy, all of this extra consciousness. And we are seeing that right now, where over the last several years, every single star in the neighborhood, from Proxima Centauri, Alpha Centauri, so there's a Wolf something rather, there are all these different names that are in our local star cluster. All of them are beginning to change in their temperature. They're emitting different frequencies of light. All of them are having these massive solar outbursts, emissions of energy. And so what that is, I've been being told this through my guides, through other information for years, that it's like a tsunami waves that are moving through our local star system. And they come in like sets, like surfers talk about catching a set. The waves kind of bunch up together a little bit as they move through. And these waves, when they come through this galactic current sheet, when it's coming through our system, it energizes everything, and it activates consciousness, and it brings all of the garbage up to the surface, because those frequencies are incompatible with the higher frequencies that are made available to us during this type of event. So yes, people's expansion of their psychic abilities, expansion of creative artistic inspiration, everything like that is happening right now across the board, across the entire planet. And I believe that if we have a little bit more understanding of how these things interact with each other, that can then support us more consciously surfing those waves, as opposed to being just completely knocked over.
Get your surfboard out and decide whether you're going to sort of run from that tsunami, or whether you're going to say, hey, great, look at that wave, and learn to ride the wave to open up to new possibilities and new potentials. And that's really what this incredible time that we're living in it gives us with these opportunities. Now, can you predict when these, is there a way to predict when these solar flares are going to happen, or when the next wave is possible, so people can prepare themselves?
Sure. So as far as the wave, and these waves moving through, I would say there are these kind of subsets within the bigger set. We are definitely in the wave right now, all indicators. This is one of the things where it gets really tricky, because the control structure of the Earth is pushing and pushing and pushing, saying that we are experiencing this thing called climate change. They used to call it global warming until the evidence showed that it wasn't actually getting warmer, it was getting colder. And so that they changed the language around it, and now it's climate change. And it's like, okay, yes, we have an impact. As human beings, we have an impact upon the environment, in our CO2 emissions and all these things. However, the last time I checked, we did not have big SUV trucks on Saturn or on Mars or on Neptune. Every single planet in our solar system is undergoing what we would call climate change. They're experiencing changes in the magnetic field. They're experiencing huge increases in temperature, even though like let's say on Neptune, maybe the temperature increased from negative 175 degrees to negative 169 degrees. So that's a change in 6 degrees of temperature, which that would be devastating. Like to have an average temperature fluctuate that much would be horrifying. And so like every planet in the solar system is experiencing this. And so it's not, there's some other effect, right? And it can be explained through this wave that is moving through us, because the plasma brings all this extra material, interstellar dust and debris and whatever, and photon, everything. It's all being pushed into our solar system, which then the sun, it accumulates in the sun's atmosphere, in the corona, which then results in some of these large outbursts. This is like what's believed to be the causal effect of these massive solar flares, these micro supernovas, they call them, that occur on a regular cycle. So we are in that wave right now. As far as predicting the events, this is where things get a little tricky. So we have different people. Like I follow a guy named Ben Davidson that's on YouTube, and he has a channel called Suspicious Observers. And this is very science focused, although he touches a little bit on like esoteric, but he really focuses on science. And his audience is mainly like physicists and geologists, planetologists, people that are studying science. And so he's developed, ways of observing, and they even have like an app that like can predict things like earthquakes and massive weather storms, and it's all based on the solar activity. So there are some ways to predict, but there's also this phenomenon that's really, the scientists can't explain it, and they call it the Earth-facing quiet effect, which means like we saw 2 weeks ago, where a massive sunspot complex releases 2 huge solar flares, really big solar flares, massive coronal mass ejection. And then as soon as those sunspots rotate around to face the Earth, where they're potentially geo-effective, everything begins to degrade. The magnetic field interaction in the sunspot degrades, and suddenly the flares weaken. And this has been happening for years, and there's no explanation, but it consistently happens. And based on intel that I've received years ago, and then corroborated by the intel from my buddy in the military, is that we have extra support right now. We have, if we understood the scale of the star civilizations that are here supporting us, it would blow our minds. And what has been happening is that these very, very advanced civilizations have been mitigating activity off of the sun to minimize the impact upon it, because we weren't quite ready yet to be able to receive all this energy to do the big phase shift into a high-dimensional state of existence. So it's kind of hard to predict what's going to happen, because we can observe these events coming around, but as they move, onto the face of the Earth-facing side of the sun, things begin to, get affected by this apparently outside influence. And so, yeah, best thing to do, or at least what I feel to do, is to, as I'm guided, I track the information and I pay attention. And when there are really intense days, I maybe go and check out what's going on the sun and look at the satellites and see what's happening.
So really, it's about preparing yourself and looking at it as a good thing, because it can bring up negativity and reflects anything that's going on in you. So you have an opportunity to see what you need to tidy up. And if you're working on yourself, then you have an opportunity to really expand your consciousness at that time. Yep.
Absolutely. That is 100%. That is, the best approach right now is to turn most of our focus inside and to be very present, because you're exactly right. All of these types of activity that are kind of external to our field, they still affect our field, right? Like I said, we're kind of quantumly entangled, as above, so below. So with that being understood, then the thing that we can work on is to be very present and be very honest with these energies that are coming up. And as we begin recognizing patterns within our life, patterns of behavior, patterns of distortion, like seeing things recurring, coming up, going, why is this happening again? These are the perfect moments then to consciously utilize this extra energy that's coming to us from the sun, and to use that like as a springboard. And that study that I mentioned, that it was in Germany, they did this a few years ago, that when there is this, when you know that there's this incoming solar activity, when you know that there's a solar wind stream that is going to pass right through the earth, which happens all the time, these are moments for us to utilize consciously to be able to like propel ourselves forward. So
okay, an interesting discussion again, and I've also got a couple of clues on what I want to speak about at our next session, because you mentioned the aurora, and I know there's some interesting information around the aurora and the cities in the sky. So I shall, I think you know some things about that. So if we tap that into our next discussion, so that it rolls from this discussion of what the solar flares are bringing up, and maybe opening up for us to see a little bit more than we normally would. And maybe there's some clues in the auroras. So thank you once again, Matthew, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol. And to everybody that's listening, enjoying this, hang in there. Things are about to get super interesting.
Bring it on.